Sometimes, against our better judgment, we do the same thing over and over again, hoping for a different outcome. Developer Housemarque's new third-person bullet hell shooter, Saros, explores this idea in many ways. The roguelite level structure, the repeated combat encounters, and the internal conflicts of its main character, Arjun. It also has a similar gameplay foundation to its predecessor, Returnal, with fluid gunplay and deft movement, but in trying to be more thematically ambitious, Saros opens itself up to pitfalls Returnal didn't have to manage, leaving some of its more interesting threads unsatisfyingly hanging. Still, its tough-as-nails combat is worth getting good for, even when its repetition can wear you down. Arjun Devraj is an expeditioner for the Space Corps Soltari. He sports the voice and likeness of actor Rahul Kohli, who absolutely nails the leading role.
This is what it does. It gets in our heads, and it twists, and it turns.
His crew is sent out to investigate the disappearance of previous expeditions on Carcosa, a planet riddled with biomechanical imagery and the gothic architecture of a lost alien civilization. The science fantasy and Geiger influence is definitely used effectively here. It's also reminiscent of the modern Doom games, especially when its chaotic combat encounters and pounding soundtrack evoke a similar feeling. You quickly realize that something is extremely off, with each solar eclipse turning the planet into a hellscape and inducing a deep psychosis that chips away at everyone's well-being as tensions grow increasingly hostile.
It was promised.
There are parallels to works like Heart of Darkness or Apocalypse Now, but Saros is more of an adaptation of the 19th century anthology The King in Yellow by Robert Chambers. It pulls names and themes directly from the book itself while brushing up against a little cosmic horror. You see Arjun battling with his own sanity and past decisions as you get further and have to ponder, what is Saltari's real purpose? Does that matter? Why does Arjun keep respawning as few even bat an eye? Is any of this real? Those are all interesting questions as you unpack what Saros is really about. And you do so primarily by blasting through multiple run-based levels that make up Carcosa. The more you familiarize yourself with the unrelenting attack patterns of enemies and learn how to be effectively aggressive with weapons you vibe with, the closer you get to a flow state that speedy shooters like this uniquely tap into. It's strongly rooted in Returnal's design philosophies, with a few edges sanded off, and while I don't think Saros is necessarily an evolution, I came away with a sated appetite for Housemarque's house style. Carcosa's various biomes are broken up into distinct levels, which themselves must be completed in a single run to make progress. It's a different way of packaging a similar idea. Levels shift ever so slightly with each run, pulling from a defined set of rooms to generate the path forward. Some rooms emphasize platforming challenges, most throw hordes of biomechanical amalgamations at you, and some are a tough mix of both. Runs do begin to blend together as the cadence doesn't really change that much since the parameters are fairly tight. But in a game like this, death is part of the process, and each failed run is a training ground for what you ultimately need to do. Get through the level as healthy as possible, and defeat its boss in one fell swoop. This largely works because, like it has done historically, Housemarque makes damn good shooters. From 2D and top-down shmups such as Resogun and Ex Machina to the third-person bullet hell of Returnal. So speed and agility are priorities, and that's balanced with a generous tracking system for aiming, which makes Saros play a little closer to an arcade shooter. I often relied on the Onslaught rifle that disables auto-aim altogether for powerful shots, or the Smart rifle that homes in on targets to let me focus on mobility. Most guns come with a satisfying impact, including pistols that remain relevant throughout, and the late-game rip saws that tear through enemies with damage over time. All of which come with different perks and in several variations that drop randomly during runs. Saros makes brilliant use of the DualSense controller's haptic feedback here, mapping its alternate fire modes to a half trigger pull that you physically feel, and the windup of your power ability to a full trigger pull, both of which are crucial to execute at a moment's notice. But having firepower is only half the battle, because the most challenging part of Saros is reacting to the colorful beams that hound you on the battlefield. Enemies fire off a rapid mix of blue shots that can be absorbed to fuel your shield and power ability, red shots that can be parried but not blocked, and yellow shots that build corruption to limit your max health, but empower certain weapons. So knowing when to evade and when to take those hits head on is something you'll constantly have to process and learn to love. Where fighting through hordes of aliens in combat arenas is about managing the chaos of everything they throw at you, boss fights are more about attention to detail, where swift visual and audio cues tip you off to what's coming, asking you to be quick enough to position yourself and react while still finding windows of opportunity to get your own shots in. This dynamic tapped into a little bit of my rhythm game skills, and it's this test of your reflexes that I enjoyed most, even in moments of frustration, because I knew coming out of the other end it would be a moment of triumph. Saros eases the friction of Returnal a bit by putting a bigger focus on permanent resources and upgrades. Back at the home base hub area, you'll work through a skill tree that improves your health, shield and power potency, and rate of resource gathering. Certain branches can boost weapon leveling to help you pick up better versions in runs or make your clutch ultimate ability stronger. But progress isn't necessarily about deepening your skill set or fundamentally changing your playstyle. Rather, it's about making its challenges a little bit more manageable for future runs, and hopefully you can play smarter as well. These are incremental upgrades that are important to obtain because things do get very difficult. But this is why Saros can get pretty monotonous at times. Instead of challenging you to think creatively about combat, more weight is put on your ability to survive in a war of attrition. I respect that approach, but when you have to spend 20 to 30 minutes going through the motions in a level just to get another shot at the boss, the repetition begins to settle in. I suppose it comes with the territory for a roguelite shooter of this style, where build crafting isn't really a thing, outside of hopefully plucking out your preferred weapons and powers with a good set of perks. It's an approach that has its merits, demanding that you stay locked in during a run, but that doesn't stop it from feeling tedious in spots. As a PlayStation 5 exclusive, Saros seems like it's trying to align itself more closely with Sony's other prestige single-player games by having a more deliberate, high-concept story. Themes of trying to break harmful cycles, coming to terms with grave mistakes, and even struggles with sexual identity work their way into what initially seems like something primarily inspired by Hollywood sci-fi. I commend that approach because there are intriguing threads to pull on, but the ways the storytelling comes up short really stick out when there's a bigger emphasis on it this time around. Saros gets halfway there, but unfortunately leaves many of its stronger plotlines underdeveloped.
I thought you were. Oh well. Huh.
Arjun is a compelling lead because while he's dead set on chasing someone important to him on Carcosa, something deeper continually brews inside him. His stubbornness manifests in various ways as he simultaneously tries to make sense of the loop that he's stuck in.
I can't let them down.
There are moments when Saros built toward revelations that felt like breakthroughs in the story, which had me engaged, but sometimes those moments would be teed up without the follow-through required for them to fully pay off. Flawed, even irredeemable characters can be really interesting, and feeling conflicted about these kinds of stories is a fascinating mental exercise to work through, but you need a deft hand to truly pull that off. Most supporting characters have arcs that boil down to their descent into madness told in voice notes, and aside from a select few back at base and a bossy Soltari computer that has a bit of an identity crisis, there isn't much added depth.
How could Soltari miss so much?
Outside of a few cutscenes, there are brief conversations with the crew, but they feel stilted and have weird face animations. At least they serve into feeding into the unnerving setting.
My job is to keep my team alive.
However, Saros does have some of the strongest use of readable data logs I've seen. Beyond just being flavor text, there's some great writing that provides insights in the form of Soltari reports, employee data, or diary-like entries which create a kind of thematic texture that's genuinely effective. And I wish some of this found its way into the main story. It doesn't help that the storytelling is so abstracted that it obscures your understanding of what is actually happening. Now, I'm not asking for its message to be spoon-fed to me, or its twisting sequence of events to be laid out in broad daylight, but I do expect the story to create through lines that lead to something we can define with only the pieces we're given. Some of my favorite stories and games leave things up to interpretation because there's real power in connecting the threads for yourself, but they still had to lay the groundwork to let us piece it together and form our own perspectives. I get the sense that Saros relied a little too heavily on its literary inspiration to fill those gaps.
Access the device and follow the path you opened.
Returnal was impactful because it solely focused on Celine and her time loop fighting through Atropos. It used that format to reflect her personal struggles that were subtle in the early hours, then gave you the means to paint a clearer picture the deeper you got. Roguelite as a metaphor works so well here, and its parallels hit hard when you reached a point where it all started to connect. Saros bites off more than it could chew, which I can admire, but the actual execution struggles to send the message it thinks it's sending. With Saros, Housemarque once again proved that its bullet hell sensibilities mesh incredibly well with fluid and super challenging action. This is primarily a test of skill that's as much a rhythmic dance as it is a fireworks show with a punch-packing sci-fi arsenal. The roguelite structure doesn't always work in its favor as it struggles to balance the repetition that's a natural part of the genre with a strong sense of progression. Although going through the motions was still fine because at least I could sharpen my skills for some sick boss fights that were as difficult as they were fun. I'm left conflicted after the 22 hours I put into seeing it all the way through to its true ending though. There's a bigger emphasis on story this time around, and it's more ambitious in some respects, which I can appreciate, but when its strongest ideas are a bit too abstracted, powerful themes can end up ringing hollow. So while it's eclipsed by its predecessor in some important ways, Saros was still worth banging my head against over and over again. If you want more on recent sci-fi shooters, you should check out my review of Pragmata, or if action RPGs are more your thing, check out our review of Diablo 4 Lord of Hatred. And for everything else in the world of games, stick with IGN.